Now we have a go button going on. It's the weekend of March 23rd, 24th, depending on your continent. Welcome to our Bucky Critical Path reading and study group. And how are you feeling, and what do you expect to anticipate to get out of today?
Okay. Good morning. Morning on my side. Good evening, and good afternoon to you, John. Yeah, that's where you're at. Or oh no, you're at the same time as I am.
Same time zone as
Good
you.
morning to you too. Yeah. Okay. I just want to say thank you, Richard. I went through the both documents, and they I think I wrote you a message today. I think CC to Steve as well. So yeah, it works beautifully for us. I really like the fact that you have put what we're doing into Bucky's whole design science, and also the comprehensive anticipatory design science, right?
Right.
And the tetrahedron, because I can see exactly how we can do it for all the things that we're doing, because each of them can be a tetrahedron on their own, following the same structure, the way you've done it with, I think, our looking at the biosphere and our entrepreneur program and so on. And I've also sent you our blueprint. We have a blueprint for our school. This was done with the help of two of our business mentors, lovely friends of ours. One is a New Zealander, the other is a South African. They both are based in Cape Town. So we did they sat with us because they train and they do master classes. They do of all over the world. I think 50 over cities all over the world, right? So we are fortunate to
Wow.
be part of their ecosystem, right? So anyway, they worked with us to create this artifact for us, which is a blueprint, and that one in one diagram it shows. But have a look at it, and maybe I'll send you an explanation if it's if you think you want me to kind of share some things. But because then that blueprint is not out in the market, because I hold off quite a lot of the things that we do, because it's really tough for us, because whatever we're doing, we're getting people copying it. But copying is one thing, but they're talking like they are doing the same thing, but they're not. We're happy to share and do more with people, but stop just taking our content and copying what we're saying, and doing a fraction of it, and that kind of thing. So we're a bit more cautious what we put out there. And there's a lot more that we have evolved within even our biosphere, and the entertainment school that's coming up, and the biosphere school that's going to open up in Bali. So anyway, but the whole framework of it, I like it a lot, because I can really see, when I read it, I'm like, oh my God, this is Bucky. Oh my God, I think we're doing a lot of these things that he's talking about, and putting it together in one document is it's amazing. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to see where we can go with it. Okay. John, how do you feel, and what do you expect to take away today?
I'm glad to be back. It's good to be able to participate. I won't be able to next week because it's Easter. I don't know whether you plan to have a group, but I have missed it, and I'm looking forward to reviewing Bucky and learning something out of it that's useful to me, and also sharing with the rest of you here. So feeling good about it. So Richard, how do you feel, and what do you hope to take out of today?
Well, I'm feeling very good. It's really serendipitous that I just got off the phone. That's why I was a little bit late. Talking to my niece and sister-in-law in Sydney. So I've already been to Australia this evening. So that was good. And so I'm looking forward to continued readings, and it's helping me formulate some more ideas and thinking around how the basic geometric thinking and figures of Bucky that can be applied in local kind of social conditions. So I'm just looking forward to continuing to read and learn from our dialogues. So over to you, Joe, and how are you feeling and what's your expectation today, this
Feeling
evening?
very good. I'm feeling very good, actually. It's great to be here on a Saturday evening. It's very good to see everybody as always. I'm very interested actually in the type of conversation that you and Ann are having. I mean, I think that there's an interesting opportunity emerging here in Philadelphia, where we're actually focused on education as well. And kind of a way of putting together a comprehensive program that is actually, though, as you mentioned, and where people may copy what you do, but they don't necessarily tailor it in a way that meets the community's needs.
Yes.
So that's really a really important part of whenever coming up with a learning plan that is actually beneficial to the local community. There are these important concepts to understand, but how to bring it back home so that the community itself can benefit, I think, is really kind of the most critical part of any type of education, because it's much more practical. There are some principles of Bucky's that I think can actually be very much applied to what we're attempting to do here, hopefully in Philadelphia. So I hope to communicate and be a little bit more engaged with that once things become a little bit more flushed out. We will definitely be focused on regenerative design, as well as how, not only how regenerative design, but also how technology can be part of the solution, but not the entire solution. And I think that that's a really important point that sometimes gets missed. And I think that that's evident with Critical Path. In the sense that what Bucky talks about throughout the book is the infrastructure, the context of the economics that underpins a lot of the technological advancements, and what happens when, to be quite frank, when desire or greed takes over. And so and we've seen that with, the way the automotive industry had evolved, where it got away from the inventors themselves, and it was no longer about the car that they were building. It was about essentially the gains that could be had out of the car, extracting value. And so I think that that's just one example. But I think, Bucky, the important part about Critical Path focuses on infrastructure and not just technology. So I think that that's actually going to be a very important point when we think about the project that we have going on here in Philadelphia is not looking to something as AI as a solution, but just look at it as, or any of these technological tools as a solutions in and of themselves, but rather part of an ecosystem that accelerates the students' learning, not necessarily is the students' learning way of learning. So there's that distinguishing it. So basically using the technology instead of having the technology use us. And again, I think Bucky and the Critical Path actually provides us why that's so important. So provides us with examples. So I'm looking forward to getting into some of those examples. Steve, how do you feel? What are you looking to take away from today?
Well, I'm with you, Joe. The Bucky's paradigm is so comprehensive. Golly, was that kind of redundant and ridiculous for me to say, but I mean, when the Native Americans looked at a situation, they looked at it in terms of 7 generations of ancestors and 7 generations of progeny. When they go into their sweat lodge, they take they have a big decision to make. So they go in and do their ceremony. It's for 7 generations in both directions. And you're so right. I mean, as soon as a technology is created, the first thing that happens is it's to be monetized. And it doesn't matter what the consequences are, short-term and long-term, doesn't matter what's being left behind, doesn't matter what the potential is, it's got to make a dollar today. And somehow that could actually doom it. That could doom whatever the resource is. And it certainly puts it in a box. And so I'm real hopeful because there's a giant democratization going on with TikTok and Instagram and everything. And it's just possible that that these social media could make institutions obsolete because kids start doing stuff and they make it a fad and they're making money off of it. I mean, kids are making money doing crazy stuff. So anyway, and we've talked about the movie Ready Player One, the idea that you can actually live in virtual reality and make money and then come out and go back into the computer. Just crazy. So I'm looking forward to this. I've learned a lot, and we're gonna learn some more. I have a couple questions. John brought up a really good point. What about Easter? Do we want to have a call on Easter, or shall I put in the next thing that we're going to take a break?
Yeah.
Take a
I
break.
think, yeah, take a break.
Yeah, we got 2 takes a breaks.
The fault on the.
All right, everybody's saying take a break. Okay, I'll put out a thing. In fact, I didn't send out one of the recordings last week because I'm so far behind. So what I'll do is I'll send out a break for Easter and send out the one recording I didn't send out. So maybe we'll see if I have time to put that together. I have another question for it in terms of operational procedures, guys. Let me ask you this question. I'm going to share with you. Yeah, I've got to push all these buttons. Okay, here we go. This is our screen on our reading tonight. I have 2 different fonts. One is there's the serif font, which is traditional Times Roman. The other is sans serif, meaning it doesn't have these little edges on it. And I've had big arguments with people. In the past, we've just been reading this Times Roman serifed font, the little, I think, and then we have this. And so I'm going to ask you, which do you choose, the top one or the lower one? And then I'm going to go one step further and bold it and ask you if that is an improvement or if you like it unbolded.
Top
You
one unbolded.
Top one unbolded.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
All right, cool. Then I'm going to go ahead and just change it because I really don't like the serifed fonts at all. I prefer sans serif font. So, and I don't know why, but there we go. Okay, good. And here's where we're starting today. We're picking up on page 303 in the book. And we're going to start with houses and buildings. Now, this is, I think we're still involved in his presentation to, it looks to me like it's still the presentation to Brazil. This is a program he, in 1945, wrote a business plan, for lack of a better word, to Brazil, saying, hey, you guys, the war is over, you guys can join the world. And then they got involved in a political unrest. And then later on here in the 60s, I guess, Brazil came back to Bucky and said, hey, what's your plan? And he's just presenting the same plan that he presented in 45 and that he wrote after the war. And it's kind of interesting. He had some main points. And now we're in a section called Big Don't. And so we'll just continue. He's talking about now, these are the kind of houses and buildings that he's proposing for Brazil. Any other comments or questions before we proceed? Now, what we've been doing is rotating reading, and everybody seems to enjoy that to some degree. While some people really enjoy reading, there seems to be a good thing for rotating. So I'm open for however we're doing it. And I'll say, who wants to start tonight? Who wants to start reading?
I'm happy to.
So, or John, I think
It's up to you guys. I mean, I like to rotate around. It keeps the conversation going, and I comprehend better when I'm not reading. So, it's up to you, John. I guess you got voted for number one. Read a couple or a few, and continue to read as long as you care
Sure.
to.
Okay. Houses and buildings, man's largest and heaviest category of per capita controlled environment, so far but meagerly developed industrially, have averaged throughout the 75 years between the Civil War and the beginning of present hostilities, 100 tonnes per capita, whereas environment control design, now well developed for aeroplanes, whose stresses in the air or on landing are many times those to which houses may ever be subjected by hurricane or earthquake, nonetheless make possible man's comfortable ascent in minutes from tropic heats in the air of 150 degrees Fahrenheit to stratosphere temperatures of minus 65 degrees Fahrenheit. This new range of environment control built lightly and sinuously into aeroplane enclosures indicates post-war housing solutions distinctly advanced in every standard of performance, yet weighing only a few £100 per capita. Thus, post-war human container weights of possibly 1/4 tonne per occupant are to be compared with the lightest wallboard prefabricated structure of 1942, which weighed 25 tonnes, not including foundations, or better than 5 tonnes per capita, while the so-called permanent housing structures of 1942, including their foundations, still averaged in excess of 100 tonnes per capita and will be obsolete in 10 years. Sorry, Bucky, you were optimistic. In order to comprehend the overall foot-poundage significance of transition from a rail-borne to an airborne economy, it is necessary to envisage this vast change in tonnage per capita inherent in the changing design throughout all services, which will be automatically propagated by the mass production industry of such lightweight housing. This industry is certain to take up the slack in world industrial production capacities and dire necessity of rehousing the multimillions of world's people, a rehousing whose standards progression will go on to rehouse the better than 2 billion population. This will be the greatest industry in all history. Brazil, with its Amazonian watershed, its hardwoods, its aluminium, its superior paper-making potentials, for paper will play a major role in the new houses, is in a unique position of advantage to initiate this industry on the scale required. Its network of jungle, airport, scientific, tropic stations and exploration centres and mechanical chemical prototyping laboratories should divide up the problem.
Last week, we read that Bucky thinks that Brazil should use hardwoods instead of steel, that hardwoods are actually more durable than steel, which was very interesting to me.
The only thing is it's not replaceable in a short period of time, whereas steel is. Can I just say, I don't know what the position's like in the countries you're in, but Australia has a huge problem of a shortage of housing. We haven't built enough. We haven't built it efficiently enough. We haven't used the sorts of things that Bucky was talking about a lifetime ago. Most of the housing in Australia still continued to be built in brick and tile or brick and COLORBOND for the roof. It's very expensive in terms of materials and labour. We have a huge shortage of skilled labour, and what's been adding to the problem is the huge influx into Australia of foreign students and foreign workers, because we have been taking in at least, I think last year was at least double our normal intake of migrants. The foreign students are returning and there is nowhere for people to live. We are seeing obscene things. I should have saved. There was a front page photograph early last week of somebody who is renting out a bed on a veranda of their home and charging $130 a night.
Yeah.
That's over $900 a week for a bed on a veranda.
Wow.
The rents have gone up astronomically. The vacancy rate is less than 1%. So for rental accommodation, the vacancy rate in Perth now is less than 1%. It's 0.7. Normally, you'd expect it to be around about 3%. And it's similar for the sale of houses. A number of friends of mine, one of the lawyers who works with us has just bought a home. The home is put on the market at a very substantial price. You go and bid for it. You say, yes, I'll pay you what you're asking. Somebody else offers more. It becomes effectively an auction.
Yeah.
And so houses are bringing substantially more than the figure they're being advertised for. And people are paying prices that are beyond what the property is really worth. Now, we are doing better than I expected in terms of mortgage distress, but we've got reasonably high interest rates. Interest rates on houses have gone from sort of housing mortgages from 2.9% to 6%, which has put pressure on. But we just don't have enough houses, and we're still not building them efficiently and cost effectively. There's a project in Australia called My Home. You can probably find it on the internet. My Home project. It's a prefabricated one-bedroom home. It's designed to accommodate the homeless, designed by a woman architect in Western Australia. The total cost of construction of the home and furnishing of the home is $100,000. And it's put on government land. What the project involves finding government land that's not likely to be used for 30 or 40 or 50 years. Peppercorn lease. They've just built 18 of these one-bedroom houses down in Fremantle in cooperation with the council and the government, and Rotary is one of the organisations involved. So there are now 15 women who've been taken off the streets. The first target is women 55 and over on the streets because they're seen as the most vulnerable. So 18 of those women now have their own little one-bedroom home in a cluster with enough land to grow a vegetable garden if they want to, or flowers, whatever. And they pay a modest rent. And we should be doing so much more of that building, because now suddenly there's a boom of put a granny flat or a bedroom, a portable bedroom in your backyard to accommodate your parents, or to accommodate somebody who'll pay a substantial rent for it, because there just isn't any accommodation available. So we haven't built housing, we haven't built it cost effectively. And we've now got a crisis. You know, when people can't get a bed, and so some owners are renting out, you know, bedroom by bedroom. They don't rent the house out, they rent out 4 bedrooms separately because they get a greater return. But it's a huge, very public, very high profile, very politically charged issue in Australia at the moment. And
You
Bucky
know,
was
we have the exact same thing going on in the US, John. Now,
You do?
I would like to see, yeah, exactly the same thing, except there aren't very many popular solutions. Do you have a link to that project you talked about?
I'll find it. Yeah.
I'd
Yeah,
love
I
to
would
see
very
it.
much. I would like to see that link as well. I mean, this is, I think, one of those, you hit on so many important points there, John. It's even what people are paying for homes, how much they should even decide to pay for homes. They don't necessarily even consider all these things. But I think there are some fundamental issues that existed especially with the U.S. housing market in particular. And you know, some would be one of the effects of raising rates is that people are not moving because they're not upsizing, because their rates are higher. Thus, you know, they're staying put, which is actually constraining supply. And this is not even individuals that are not even have access to housing. This is just a flat out housing market. And Steve knows it better than I. But that it is limiting the amount of supply, thus, and it's driving up the price and creating a shortage. But there's that other aspect of it where we start to, what Bucky's talking about, is starts to get to, you know, what are the values and then what are the qualities associated with housing itself. So the value being, is it just perpetual get into a bigger house? And what are the qualities? In other words, the quality in the sense that that the quality of the product itself is actually not even necessarily as good as it should be. We're talking materials wise, or
Very
as good as
poor.
very, yeah. And so you have those two issues where the value, could be more or less about upsizing, but more about providing quality housing at a reduced rate, and really kind of embracing ephemeralization. So I think that and that again comes not from having to upsize to have the biggest house. It comes from actually really focusing on how to most effectively address the housing shortages in price, the housing price increases and the housing shortages. And it is one of those systems problems that is it has to be very analyzed very carefully, in the sense that it's not just the materials, it's not just the structures, it's not just the labor, that's all, and the interest rates themselves, but it also includes things like zoning, and that is something that is a very local problem. And that really creates can create issues, and so that's something that I think that where we can get to the idea of applying some of the universals that we're talking about with Bucky. What are the structures, what are the goals, what are the values, what are the qualities of the things that we're producing? But it becomes a very local problem really quickly. And that's where that local understanding and process of how to work with communities to provide them with not only things that, that are beneficial for everyone, but things that are just going to be accepted. I mean, to be quite honest, that's what reality is that, and so it really is but now there's a way of doing that, but still, it is one of those complex problems that needs to be navigated. But there are solutions. There are solutions out there. But I think you also have to change the narrative. And I think Bucky's talking about that in a way, but it's kind of really fully embracing the ideas of ephemeralization. And in doing that, it's a multifaceted problem.
I just want to say that, John, you've just got me going down a rabbit hole here, because I'm looking at granny homes, They're so cute. Oh my God. And they've got the granny flats that's I think this is in the US. And then there's this one called the coolest granny pods. Adorable, $1,500 US. And then I got into this whole, it shows up that they're selling it on Shopee, foldable container homes, and then about 35,000 ringgit, which is about less than 8,000 US. Really, really nice looking homes,
Where this is
How
on the
much?
way you're finding?
You just go in there, you'll see lots.
Well,
You
I
go
don't know
up
where to go.
to,
Where do I go, Anne?
you go into the granny homes.
Granny
Just
flat.
call them granny homes. Yeah, just call them granny homes, and you get more than the flats. You get a lot of other things like pods and container homes, and
All right, I'll go to general.
you
granny
just
home.
change the the category to granny homes.
I will do that. I thought I was in the process. The Zoom and multiple
Yeah,
searches
no,
doesn't go well. I don't want to interrupt you, Anne, so complete any thoughts you have there.
No, it's just that's amazing because my only question is why granny and why not grandpa, So
Why not? Grandpa,
Um,
yeah.
I think
I was
women,
thinking about the name too. Ann.
women outlive men. So currently at least.
Yeah,
I guess
women are more often seen as the homemakers.
yeah. And I get it because you're saying that the first one to bring out off the streets are the women because they're most vulnerable, right?
Mhm.
But yeah. So but the thing is, once you go down this path of granny homes, then the guys might not want to be in a granny home.
I
So-
think, Anne, that they're using granny home as a term to offset any stigma,
Yes. Stigma.
any of the stigmatization is what I was looking for, of tiny homes. Because they've been trying to do homes,
Ah.
they've been trying to do tiny homes in America for a long time, and cities will not do them. And so maybe
Right.
granny home is a way to create a more emotional, connotative, affirmative response. Nope,
I think
tiny
you're
home.
right.
I think efficient homes would be,
Yeah.
one that would resonate, but.
Yeah, and the first thing I was showing there was was John's link, what she put in the thing. So if anybody wants to look through John's link, you're going to
I
find
do.
any other are you guys all complete? Because I want to show you something too, but I don't want to interrupt anybody. So Anne, are you complete?
Yeah, I think I have one more thing because when you look at these homes, you know how it was just something John said, right? Because in Malaysia we can also get those like wooden the garden sheds, right? They're made of plastic. You just stick it in the back of your garden, and this is not far off from just putting one in your garden so that the grandparents can live together, right? And that's already happening. I think we're just one step away from making this this accepted by the local councils and all that, because a lot of these types of buildings are already being used for camping sites and those outdoor sites. So I'm quite hopeful with this. It looks great, actually. Thank you. I'm done with it. Thank you.
Cool. Anybody else have any? These are Tesla homes. Elon Musk was big on building these little modular houses, and they're really beautiful, and they pack up into a trailer, and you go in and they unfold. Instead of even prefab homes, the truck brings in the slabs, and then they bring in a crane and connect the slabs together to create the house. But Tesla homes, they are actually they fold up into a flat thing. Then you can bring them out, and then they unfold into a house. And I've seen some good videos on it, but I think there are some neat trends happening that Bucky would be really happy with. But I do believe that they're not. They're having trouble. Nobody wants to have a little house next to their big house because they're afraid that it'll bring down the value of their big house. So the question is where to put them. That's the question.
Yeah.
They don't want a bunch of poor people living next door to them. They want to keep rich people living next door to them.
Well, that's just the opposite here. In our kind of neighborhoods, we've got big homes coming into where little homes are, like ordinary kind of.
Well, that happens. There's tons of trees around where you are, though, right, Richard?
Well, not in the suburbs, only the trees that have been planted by and large. But it's just interesting. People are buying up homes, tearing them down, and then putting up big, 4 and 5 bedroom homes, and they're making them 2 stories instead of 1 story, and that way, then it blocks the sunlight to the neighboring house, especially if it's on the south side of your house. And it just, but it's interesting. We're worried in our kinds of neighborhoods that the big house that's going in there will actually bring down the value of the of the existing homes. But
Well,
anyway,
and this is where I was getting at. when I was talking about values, meaning not necessarily value per se in the sense of price,
Right.
value in the sense of what is the problem that's being solved.
Yeah.
And so, when you're focused specifically on just growth or expanding what you already have, then that is not going to necessarily be the most sustainable nor the most desirable approach. Not to say that, that approach can be stopped, but there can be other approaches in other communities that can turn the tide, I think, and serve as an example as a better path than just building bigger and bigger homes, because there's also this increasing, if you look at it in terms of expectations of what people, one of the signs, and whether it's valid or not, but I think it is, that the expectations of the generation living as well as their parents did is actually they have a lower expectations than their parents, and part of that is a lot of the debt associated with either going to school or whatever it may be, so that a solution like this might be, I think there are communities that might be more amenable to these types of solutions now. But there are going to be those communities that Richard had spoke of that are going to be resistant. But I do think that there are more and more opportunities to provide the solutions like the ones that we're discussing.
Yeah,
So
I've been thinking that in a slightly different context, but that every 50 to 75 years, the whole world should reset, and you go back to pay your $5,000 house and let it grow up to 200,000 or 300,000, and then you have to reset again. Because right now it's crazy, as you say. With my family in Australia, in Sydney, of course, very expensive city. They've just sold a home, an estate home, a family estate, that I think was purchased in 1962 or 3 for maybe $40,000, and it sold for over $2 million. It's crazy, and it's exactly what John was saying. You had bidders come along, and eventually the highest bidder walks away with the property. And often, as you say, it's something higher than the price that was either listed or recommended.
Same thing's happening in the US.
Yeah.
yeah.
Is it different though? I mean, I understand that Texas and Florida are doing very well because they've changed their tax structure, and big businesses are leaving New York to go to places like Texas and Florida. Apparently, Tesla's moved into Texas and building a huge factory there, and because it's been made much more attractive financially. But I take it there are also states that are doing it tough.
Yeah, God help anybody that wants to move to Texas these days. Holy doodle.
Why is that?
Oh, because some of the immigration things that they're trying to do, and
Oh, yes,
the abortion, reproductive rights issues, and one of the states now has passed a law that basically says a man has a right to rape a woman and impregnate her, and the woman does not have the right to abort, and if she does, she'd be charged with murder, and she'll spend the rest of her life in jail. Not
I know,
him.
that's just disgusting.
Jesus.
Here's a boxable Tesla home, and it's leaving the launching pad. And then here's a little, hang on, there's a little walkthrough, but then also it'll show it unfolding. Here we go. They move it in, Yeah, I'm sorry, he's got so much stuff. I've had just a 3-minute thing without promoting all this stuff. Hang on. I think the next scene after, there we go. I and I hope this is, I slowed it down so that we could see the thing unbox. Here we go. Anyway, maybe it's if you're interested, you can do stuff on that.
Yeah, could you put that in the chat? I mean, I think that is, that is interesting to me.
I will put it in
Yeah.
the chat. And I'll,
Then you need to go to Northern Norway. We were on it this morning with another group of the people that have built, basically an ordinary house, and then they put a big dome over it, and they're living in the Arctic Circle part of Norway.
oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really quite a fascinating experience. They've been in the home now for 9 years, I think. And
Under the dome?
yeah, well, they live in what you and I would call an ordinary house, sort of a box, if you want, type house, but it's been made out of a mixture of mud and straw and something else in terms of the building materials.
Right.
And then the dome, it goes over it and gives you greenhouse space and everything. And they've got it such that in the summer you have cool air coming in underground, and in the winter that ground is warmer than the outside, so it actually has warm air coming in. And everything is recycled as far as compost and that sort of thing.
If you have any pictures of that, that would be fun to see. How high over the roof is the dome? Or is it just the dome attached to the house?
No, it's over it. It's like Bucky's idea of doming Manhattan.
Wow.
No,
Wow.
it's just one house. I'll see if I can find it.
Okay. While we're on the top, any other comments? I have something I want to share.
Please.
All right. So have you guys heard about California Forever? Okay.
No.
So some corporation from Delaware was working east and north of Oakland, buying up ground from farmers. And all of a sudden, the New York Times did an investigation. They bought all this ground next to a U.S. Air Force base. So now they were concerned that maybe it was the Koreans or the Chinese who were trying to spy on America. So it ends up that they started doing a little bit of research, and they discovered who some of it was. And so they made the whole thing public, and it's called California Forever. And a bunch of billionaires in Silicon Valley and around San Francisco are so disgusted with San Francisco housing and what's going on, and they tried to get these little subdivisions built that would conform, that would create modern housing and that would be efficient. And there's so many rules. I don't know if you heard about it, but in California, somebody was trying to put in a toilet, and with the permits and everything, it was $1 million. Of course, that was a fluke. But just because of all the little regulations that nobody had comprehensively integrated, they had to go from one department for next to put in a public toilet, and the permits cost $1 million. I think the toilet cost 150 grand or something. So these guys just started buying up ground in California, and when they came under suspicion, they revealed what it was, and they're doing massive public relation campaigns. So here's Oakland, California, down here, close to there's Oakland, California. Here's the Bay. Here's Vallejo, California, if you know anything about Northern California. So all this area is what you might call Silicon Valley. And right here is this new community right here. They just started buying all this ground up. Now they're promoting it, and they're inviting everybody to buy into the corporation and give them stock so they can develop the whole thing, because they can do their own city and have their own rules and don't have to put up with all the red tape in the big city. And they're promoting it. It's called California Forever. And they want to do a model city with high-speed transit and, get rid of cars and do things right. So that's kind of interesting. Bucky would like that. And I put that link into your thing down there.
I'm interested in that as well, because I really think that there's California in particular, and actually when John was speaking a little bit earlier about how much people were paying to sleep on couches and things along those lines, California immediately had come to mind. But one of the things that I have given a lot of thought about is lately is this balance between you know, what regulations are really effective and helpful and which ones actually stymie innovation. And I think that there is there are some that, obviously that are in place for good reason, but then there are some that create an inability to provide a solution to people, for people, which are not intentional sometimes. They're just on the books, and they've been on the books, and repealing them becomes problematic. And repealing them is problematic primarily because sometimes people that are there don't necessarily want change. And California's in a position now, I think, where they absolutely have to reinvent themselves. Otherwise they will, have problems, remaining competitive with other states, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I found a really quick short here on the Tesla model homes,
Mhm. This is a two-story.
It can be a one-story or a two-story. They're showing how they build the one-story down on top, and then they can stack them. They put two side by side in the top video, and they stacked them in the bottom video. Now they're putting up another one up there. And each of these boxes are $8,000 to $10,000. You bring them in, and you have a place to live. And Elon was living in one of those during part of his time with SpaceX. He put it in next to SpaceX down below. Okay, good. Any other comments or questions? We'll get back to the reading. Let me see here. Oh, there we go. Okay. What fun. Okay.
Realistic planning, is that where we're up to? No.
I think it's further pointed out.
Yeah. It is further pointed out to bring this prognostication home that the highest building rate ever attained in the US provided only 280,000 single-family dwellings in 1 year, 1/4 the number required by annual marriages, 1/6 that required to offset annual disaster losses and complete obsolescence, a rate inadequate to total emergency. Such methods, which failed miserably to keep pace with civilization from 1913 onward, obviously could not cope with a totalized world housing problem. Realistic planning on the part of Brazil means taking advantage in advance of this vast accrual of overall foot poundage saving per unit of designed environmental control. If so, it is simply indicated that air transport can be relied upon by Brazil as the major category of direct physical communication. Air communication may be appropriately augmented in descending order of importance by roadways, waterways, cableways, and only in instances of highly specialised requirements by railways. Emerging from an era, where did that go?
I'm so sorry.
Emerging from an era of steel surplus, shutdown, and scrap dumping, in which millions were spent to find out how many things could be built of steel, such business being secured on our substitute basis by price and service advantages, we came sharply into the war-caused shortage of steel. It became our job to supply half the world's inherently wasteful, though efficiently energy designed, steel requirements of war. Despite the strong need, it is only within recent months that steel has been importantly reduced in building. So strong were designing habits and families. So strong were designing habits and so difficult to change were labour and building codes. In the course of abandoning all steel buildings and then steel structural buildings for reinforced concrete and brick, first steps in real steel economy were taken by the engineer designer Albert Kahn. These were effected through continuously welded steel reinforcing rods for large spans. Further steel reductions were effected by others through stressed steel wire reinforcement. Opening just this month is the first steel-less bomber production plant of the Douglas aircraft, designed and erected by Austin Company at Des Plaines, Illinois. Despite increasing spans unknown to pre-war industrial requirements of 150 and 200 feet, with straightaways of several thousands of feet, the Austin Company provided a superior truss construction of laminated wood members, not only for the roof, but for all structural columns. Steel was eliminated in the building, concrete aprons and footings, without deleterious effect. This was not a compromise, it was better building. The equivalent insurance rates indicated equal fire safety to that of a steel building because the structure was completely equipped with sprinklers linked up by plastic conduit. Practically the only steel used in the plant was for tools and equipment.
Let's
Which is
pause it.
interesting. We're seeing more use of steel in housing in Australia at the moment. They're building steel framed houses rather than timber framed houses.
Yeah, we have metal studs to replace 2x4s. I'm going to ask my son about that. He's a contractor.
Mm.
And I didn't mean to interrupt you, John. Are you
Oh, you're
completely? Okay, good. Let me see. And I've lost my thought now between the steel studs and everything. I guess we can continue reading unless somebody else has something to offer.
Sure. Now, where are we up to?
The tremendous.
The tremendous advantage to Brazil with its hardwood so eminently suitable for building, as determined by the Ford Company in its Brazilian operations, that is implied in this change of affairs, freeing their industrial growth from any limitation by steel except for use in tools, is evident. It is even indicated that that the bases, arbors and frames of the machine tools themselves, etc., which were formerly made of heavy steel casting, and in recent war years were increasingly fabricated out of welded steel sections, could now be expeditiously supplemented in many instances by compound curvature, conical or cylindrical form phenolic resin laminated hardware structures. This would eliminate another important category of heavy steel tonnage.
I remembered my point. Bucky pointed out in the last few sections we've been reading that at the time in 1985, at the time of the writing of this book, Critical Path, there was enough surplus waste metals of all kinds, brass, steel, all kinds, that they could simply recycle what they'd already had available and not mine anymore and melt and create any more metals, which was shocking to me. He's saying, look, we don't need to do any more mining. We don't need to, all we got to do is just re-implement, reuse, figure out how to recycle the metals we've already got here. And we don't need to mine anymore. He had that all figured out mathematically. He had proof for it. That was interesting to me. Any other comments?
I'm just say
What's that?
yours. Go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
He called it recirculation. I loved it,
Yeah.
And yep. And quite an eye-opener for us to start looking at solutions above ground and under the ground. Anyway, I'm done. I just remember the name. Yeah.
Something that was actually interesting that he had mentioned a couple of paragraphs ago actually was about the labor, and that's going to be interesting as far as what does labor look like for something putting together these types of structures, what types of skills are needed, and essentially not only what types of skills are needed, but just to give you a sense of proportion, I was in a meeting where they talked about one of these major freighters coming across the Atlantic, and that it was only had 9 people essentially on it, and that you know that you're doing more with less, but that's also including labor, and so that's something to be considered as far as how that it's more with less with materials, but it's also, and this is where I was also saying a little bit earlier, is, you know, if we only looking at it from a technological perspective, you also have to consider the how what it means for human beings as well, what it means for the organizations, the communities, the the organism itself, if you will, if you really want to use a meta concept. But yeah, I mean, because sometimes things like housing starts are seen as indicators that obviously leading indicators, and this goes back to a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago. Housing starts are seen as indicators as to economic productivity, and essentially as a way of predicting having a positive economic outlook for growth. But maybe those indicators change, just as we were talking about it a couple of weeks ago with the Phillips curve. Things like that is an example where things become the use of these types of indicators are no longer as valid as they once were. And if that is the case, what are you looking at as far as how it's going to impact the local economy? I mean, these are important questions to think. On the flip side of this is not only the affordability and bringing down the price, but what's the price point for which where the consumer shows up? That is a question to be asked. Now, in certain cases, obviously, with programs like the one we were just talking about a little bit earlier, there's supplements that can help with kind of maintaining the housing. But anyway, it's a lot. It just shows you how dynamic this problem really is. And if you were to go before a zoning board, practically speaking, these would all be things that that you'd have to discuss, because many times if you do go before a zoning board and you talk about and Steve, this way better than I do, if you talk about things, the infrastructure that you're going to provide and all those other things, the types of zoning that you would like, many times you're talking about what types of businesses are going to show up. And that becomes enticing to the local community to be able to be willing to even, accept certain types of changes. So, anyway.
Cool. Joe, I heard that news on that ship. They normally, and I may be exaggerating these numbers, but they normally had 54, something like that, 50 employees that had to go out on their merchant marines, had to go out for 6 months or 9 months. So they had to have food for 64 people and plan on them being out for 9 months. And this new computerized ship has 9 people on it, and the rest is run by computers and AI. That's the same one you were talking about, right, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, and this was repeated in a meeting that I was in, and it was a story that it was out there, and I was actually unaware of it until all this had come out. But yeah, but it's an example
Yeah.
But it's also an example of doing more with less.
Yeah,
Ephemeralization, yep.
You know, there's
there are, go ahead.
I'm sorry, and well, I'm just saying is that's where it's kind of like not looking at it from only the technological solution and looking at it from holistic, what does it do for human beings? Yeah, at a certain point, you know, what is it actually doing? So that you have to ask those types of questions. If you got 9 people coming over with, you know, a fleet of cars, who the hell's going to buy it?
I've even heard news where they are launching drones from US ships in the Baltic Sea, and the pilots are in Nevada.
Yeah.
They're not even on the ship where they launched the drones, and that's how they're taking care of the Houthis, who are trying to mess up the shipping channels.
Ugh.
So that's very interesting. I put also the definition for the Phillips curve in the chat, something that Joe mentioned that I thought might be helpful because I didn't know what a Phillips curve was, but it has to deal with inflation and employment.
Okay.
And the idea that they lower the unemployment rate, the higher the inflation is. And that's what's going on in America today, is we got all this, we're trying to cool inflation, and and in spite of, you know, the labor market is just undaunted, and still inflation's coming under control. I think it takes a little bit of corporate discipline, and I think that there's very little corporate discipline in America.
But yeah, in around 2000, was under actually right around, no, maybe a little bit earlier than that, around 1998. You know, they started to find that this is like, I think unemployment hit 3.2 or 3.3, or no, maybe it was under 4, and they weren't seeing they weren't seeing certain, you know, types of other types of rampant price increases like they once were. But you know, that's also changing now too. It's what does unemployment look like?
Yeah. I'm convinced that corporate greed, if they can get the price, they'll get the price. And
right. Well, there
that's
is that.
inflationary.
That's part of it. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. John, do you still want to go, John?
I'm ready to go, yep.
Okay,
So
cool.
we're standards, right?
Right.
While a great deal of additional information was received from the interviews in connection with optimum versus elephantine or insectine sizes of equipment to be amplified in production capacity by batteries of such optimum units, such as a 1,000-ton blast furnace, 50,000 kVA horizontal generator, grain storage in progressively decentralized 30,000 bushel silos, country town elevators of 500,000 bushels, and central market elevators of 1, 2, and 3 million bushels, etc. These are, of course, only dramatic items amongst millions of optimum standards developed to high degree by the war effort. Whether determined by guesswork or hard research, for Brazil to depend solely on the efforts of US engineering concerns themselves, whose whole organisation is given to maintenance of the latest stage of advance in such matters, is, in any event, inappropriate. This is the consensus of the interviews. It is worth noting that there has been a long-time trend to increasing decentralisation of such industrial operations into the foreign countries by the specialists in such fields, in lieu of the constantly decreasing foreign investment of dollars in uncontrolled operations. In spite of a clearly defined trend of the major opinion cited in this report, it is worth noting that Russia's first 5-year plan was characterised also by complete modernisation of their existing industrial plant structure. Their 1914 industrial status was approximately that of Brazil's present stage of industrialisation, a broad picture with ample safety factor for present emergencies and future development was demonstrated by the Russians, who renovated many old plants and augmented them with much new equipment in European Russia west of the Urals. East of the Urals, Russia built its brand new economy, literally growing its towns out of scientific exploration. Your page number's in the way, Steve.
Well, I put
Of
it there.
scientific exploration stations. To this new Russia, they shifted their new tools from the European theatre when the enemy advanced and allowed their renovated old industry to take the gaff, essentially liquidating their foothill plants of the first 5-year operation. In the same way, plans for realistically improving Brazil's present industrial plant may be considered as the stepping stone of the moment, which Brazil can well afford to scrap when its brand new scientific industry of the hinterland has gained youthful strength. Most urgent scientific admonition towards successfully realising any plan is to take advantage of each of the trends and to develop them, no matter that it may be in a novel manner, towards the advantage of the populace concerned. There is no reason, for instance, why Brazil should not develop from the start a completely smokeless industrialisation, providing a high standard of living. The smoke characterising early industrialisation of the North is now a mark of unattended inefficiency to Northern engineers. Important byproducts are being wasted, environment frictions are being increased. The area of dense jungle land of Brazil is greater than half of the US. It has been penetrated by few of the Brazilians who, living in the cooler southeast, speak of it as the green hell of the north. Board officials say that most Brazilians inquire of them with as much wonder regarding the vast reaches of Brazilian jungles as do New Yorkers regarding the North Pole. Certain it is that the jungle in no way lends itself to the easy speculative wanderings of homesteaders and prospectors. An entirely different means for deploying the Brazilian population over the whole of their land for purposes of its development must be devised from those which augmented the pioneering of the US, Canadian and Russian hinterlands. Almost so simple that it would be shunned by those who refer to plan the hard way in order to take advantage of their hard-earned specialised experience of the past, is the technique now provided by modern warfare that would approach this whole Brazilian jungle land from above, bombing it open and parachuting in with well-planned hand equipment and personal protective devices to carve out a complete polka dot pattern of island airports over the whole country, into which pattern mechanical devices would be fed progressively as parachute deliveries graduate to plane-landed deliveries. Each area would receive its quota of machine tools, drafting equipment, air conditioning, etc., and then its engineering and designing personnel would amplify the hold on the jungle. This island network of tropical research and development stations should form the nuclear structure for the new Brazil. Dramatically emphasised by its absence was any discussion on the part of American engineers of aid to Russia in establishment of communication services beyond Russian consultations in New York with the Radio Corporation of America. The wireless had supplanted almost completely the wired technique of early American communication. Russia was able to adopt an early stage of wireless communication without re-exploring the arduous step-by-step advances in communication by wired means. In the same way, it is quite as practical for Brazil to consider accelerated development of its land by an essentially trackless scheme. They will be able to buy, post-war, if not later, manufacture for their own account, thousands of helicopters, which would make this form of functional exploration highly effective and easy to integrate. The inexhaustible wealth of scientific principle. Distinguishing the characteristic of this digest is that it takes heed of the war's #1 lesson. That is, the advantage of employing science to satisfy needs stated as functions. Any economy irrespective of the relative quantities of traditionally esteemed elements in its physical resources inventory, can outperform per capita any other economy in direct proportion to the degree of the initial control in planning conceded to science by politics. That is, outperform as measured in terms of services and satisfactions produced per potential consumer. That Germany will probably be smothered by the Allied war effort should not be allowed to obliterate this lesson. The United Nations already developed fuel and hydraulic generation.
All right, did I lose you?
No. I'm just
Generation flow, yeah, it's, I'll just say, there's a lot of interesting statements.
advancing the physical odds constantly. Is that where we are?
We're right now is the, was it not been allowed to obliterate the lesson the United Nations
That
already.
Germany will
developed.
probably be smothered. We
Flow.
read that. The
Yeah, the
United
flow.
Nations already developed
Flow and
fuel and
potential
hydraulic
manpower.
generation, flow and potential manpower, as well as its physical resources in most of the traditionally important economic categories, outranked Germany's initial inventory by 100 to many hundreds %. Advancing the physical odds constantly, which is what the continued war effort adds up to, does not change the fact that Germany's operational setup of overall scientific ingenuity forced the World Race Committee, in order to maintain its prerogative, into repeatedly calling for new runoffs, at the same time rearranging the handicap until, in a finally recognised heat, at last won by the United Nations, the handicap ratio was equivalent to starting Germany's horse at scratch in a 1 mile mark. And because in the end, sheer preponderance of physical advantage volumetrically smothers the scientifically engineered.
Sorry. I've got to scientifically engineered combustion. Oh, geez, come on. Sorry. Scientific. Engineered.
Steve, you got to get to page 308. This is 303.
There we go.
Yeah.
And because in the end, sheer preponderance of physical advantage volumetrically smothers the scientifically engineered combustion, that blanketing must never be allowed to blind the world.
To blow in the world to the technical significance.
Significance inherent in the demonstration. That is, by discovering the sources of energy available, and every major economy has a scientifically potential superabundance, by decentralising and immobilising parts fabrication and arranging a shifting foci of assembly to adjust to expediency, production may start with any one of a number of alternative raw sources of the atmosphere, vegetation, water, metallic ores, woods, etc. Concentrated energy in stabilised potentials in the form of coal and oil are great conveniences and represent a head start, but no more than that to science. Thus is independence of immobile structure, tracked, wired, localised, frozen investment accomplished. Thus the economy divests itself of slavery to obsolescence. Thus is energy constantly remounted to provide the human intellect with the greatest hitting power or an over-alert morphology. Scrap elements elsewhere, even in the form of bombed equipment and fired munitions, only represents an increased abundance of highly concentrated raws, ever more widely distributed. Scrap, actual potential, i.e. in junkyard or in obsolete building, machine or fixtures. It must be realised is a mine above ground in highly concentrated forms of the original chemical elements which had been reworked by nature many times before man worked them. The 92 elements are never second-hand. They are primary electrical behavior patterns. Energy to rework them is plentiful. They should always be rearranged in their most efficiently useful condition to the service of man. That is pure mathematics. Any evolutionary outcropping of the newer, more efficient arrangement can never be long suppressed.
Mm.
Chapter 10, Critical Path, Part 4.
Okay, hold it for 1 second. He actually used the word junkyard there. And
Yep.
when we were, he called them recirculation yards. He didn't say scrap yard. He didn't say junkyard. He said, we have all this scrap and it's really, we can reuse it. We can recirculate it. But he actually used the word junkyard here, which was interesting because he never used it in any other context. So that was interesting to me.
Well, I mean, just really briefly, I mean, I think one of the main keys here is keeping it at a meta level without going into all the minutia. Is the importance of a system being flexible and being able to innovate. Which is something that has been kind of consistent with what we're talking about.
But Bucky keeps assuming that we will operate efficiently when, in fact, for commercial and political reasons, we often don't.
Right.
We're reusing all the steel above ground. We're still mining iron ore.
Right.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that, I would say, maybe that could be updated a little bit, but I think one of them consistently is that I do think Bucky was right, at least about in theory. I don't know. I think in as far as time is concerned, I think he definitely underestimated some of how bureaucratic structures could strangle progress in certain cases, mostly politicians, and specifically incumbents, how they can actually work in conjunction with politicians to stop some of the advancements that he's talking about. Not to say that they won't eventually get to where they need to be, but maybe that those structures are there, and in certain cases, have prevented innovation, and this is where this I really think of it. I had a discussion about this idea of creative destruction a couple weeks ago, and which is a well-known economic theory, but part of that is the ability to allow the system to adapt, and not necessarily you have a system that is that has structure, obviously, but doesn't have so much structure that it actually prevents entrepreneurs or people with new ideas coming up with solutions to problems, and thus unseating incumbents like the coal industry or whatever it may be, or the oil and gas would probably be a more appropriate example, and moving towards things that are renewable. So I think that's where I think that that a lot of times that these lobbies do get in the way, obviously, of innovation. That's just something that has to be dealt with.
Cool. We sure can continue to read here, chapter 10.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering when Bucky actually quit giving us his verbatim proposal to Brazil. I kind of have a sensibility that when it stopped indenting there, on page before he went to the big don't, when he stopped indenting on page 299, Brazil should consider the lease development. He never really announces, I've now completed, this is the end of the presentation to Brazil. It's like he's explaining his presentation and why it was so valuable and how it fit in the context. So I don't know that that's an important issue, but I like to know when things begin and when things end. So I'm just making it. Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I just want to add that, you know, so long ago, he already pointed out how we can leapfrog over technologies, yeah? And so because he talked about Russia leapfrogging over wire communication into wireless. And I think a couple of maybe weeks ago, we were talking about how Vietnam, you know, they literally leapfrogged over what do you call 1.0, 2.0, and they jumped straight. Oh no, sorry, they leapfrogged over 2G, 3G, and they went straight into 4G. You know, and that's why the development is so fast. So did China. So they didn't have to grapple with existing infrastructure for 2G and 3G. So they could just build 4G from, you know, without it, because those of us who are in 2G, 3G, what do you do with the old infrastructure, right? So we still had to use and work with it, whereas they didn't have to. They just jumped right over and went into. So it's so much more efficient for them. And so anyway, that's kind of one of my biggest takeaway from that the paper to Brazil has been, yeah. So done.
Yeah, that was an interesting. That particular point wasn't lost on me too. With the Russian telecommunications in particular. That's a very deep kind of issue that you could almost write a whole dissertation on. Because I actually knew people that were part of would have been, I don't know, what year was this written again?
40 something, 1940.
43. It says on the front,
yeah.
43.
Yeah, so I mean, this is the Soviet Union at that point, and so I did know people that worked in that industry in particular. It's very complex because what they did advance in that area, they stagnated in others. In particular, those communications. So looking at things from a total systems point of view, the telecommunications industry in Russia in particular, that they were advancing things like voice over IP, and they were making advancements in that industry, but it was at the expense of other things many times, which really was problematic for the Soviet, what had been the Soviet Union. I knew a few engineers that actually worked on that particular problem. Very good ones. Telecoms. You're on mute, Steve.
I asked if there were any other comments, and I'm ready to get back to the reading. Jeez. Here we go. Okay, good.
Shall we start with chapter 10?
Yes, let's go for it.
Critical Path, part 4. Having committed ourselves to solving humanity's problems with artifacts, we can use the geoscope and world gaming strategies as a test bed and can now sort out which comes first of various artifacts, all of which are going to be needed to get Spaceship Earth operating omni-cooperatively on behalf of all. Not only may we begin to make the whole world work for all humanity, but incidentally to actualize the human functioning in universe as local information gatherers and local problem solvers in support of the eternal regeneration of universe itself. No single move can bring us more swiftly in the direction of complete overall de-sovereignization, unblocking the free flow of technologies and resources, than that of instituting the world-around integrated electrical energy network, fully described in the introduction to this book and the World Game chapter. Next in artifact design priority to the integrated world electrical energy network comes the physical environment controlling the equipment of world around humanity's momentarily geographically fixed activities. Fixed in contradistinction to humanity's swiftly mobile environment controlling artifacts such as automobiles, buses, trains, airplanes, and satellites, so seemingly stationary are city skyscrapers that few think about the fact that all their parts have been transported from far away and that many of those parts and materials have been intertransported many times in the course of their production and assembling. As of 1980, the average USA family moved out of town to a new location every 3 years. They do so primarily in readjusting human production functions to relocated factories and offices and to new airport and shopping centres, living local convenience. When I speak of mobile dwellings, I do not refer to camping trailers or tents. I speak of those dwellings which will remain geographically fixed for many months or years, but which are readily and economically transportable and reinstallable over wide ranges of distance.
I will say,
Yeah.
if I may, that being an active realtor, I mean, major active realtor in 1980, he's exaggerating because we had statistics that showed it was every 5 years that families moved for a new home. 3 years is pretty aggressive. I'm sure some did, but the average was 5 years, and that was from the NAR, National Association of Realtors. So just a point of information.
Mm.
Yeah.
And the book says it's published in 81. So I don't know. Good. Any other comments, thoughts,
Yeah,
questions?
I thought it was a little bit late. I thought this was around the 80s.
In the book, he actually says when he was writing it, and I circled it, but I forgot to mark it to remind myself when to get back. Okay, cool. Any other comments or questions? All right, I think we're at page
310, critical path.
Right.
As I've mentioned before and now repeat in a more comprehensive manner, in 1800, the average human being was walking an annually cumulative distance of 1,100 miles and riding 10 additional annual miles. By 1900, the average human being was yet walking a total of yearly distance of 1,100 miles, but the average USA citizen's annual vehicle-ridden miles had increased to 400. All humanity is, as yet in 1980, walking an annual average of 1,100 miles, but in the USA, Europe, and parts of the Near East, Asia, Africa, and Australia, all men, women, and youngsters free to travel are averaging over 20,000 annual miles of vehicular travel. Class 1 evolution has all humanity progressively crossbreeding to produce an integrated world human race. If we pass our present cosmic examination to continue aboard planet Earth in universe, the to and froing of humanity will increase rapidly. The motion patterns of humanity, as also mentioned earlier, are pulsating between ever more widely convergent and divergent toing and froing. Two main types of environment controls are required: a whole city under one dome for convergent phases of human living, and single family or small group air deliverable domes for remote deployment.
Are you stuck down there?
Yeah, I just lost my spot there for a moment. There is a whole city under one dome for convergent phases of human living, and single family or small group air deliverable domes for remote deployment for skiers, geologists, artists, and others. Yes.
Okay, that's the end of that particular section. I'm noting he mentions class 1 evolution again, which is very interesting because that's one of Susan's favorite topics. So I'm kind of corresponding that in my book here so that I can go back. Cool. Any other comments? Shall we continue to read? Let's do it for a little bit more. We've got a few more
Okay.
minutes here.
Since 1927, I have been deeply involved with the issue of making high-performance shelter available to all humanity. By high performance, I mean such environment controlling shells and their survival equipment as can be produced only by the most advanced aircraft and space technology, and the latter's level of technical problem solving. In 1927, I anticipated a 50-year-long gestation period for a new building industry. Since 1977 was the 50-year target date, I began the prototyping of my Fly's Eye Dome, which embodied design attention to all that I had learned not only throughout that 50-year development period, but in all my 32 earlier years. They will not be sold. Like telephones, they will be rentable. The Fly's Eye uses a very few types of nestable, mass-produced fiberglass sheet aluminium of thin gauge or polyester-coated sheet steel components that, when assembled, produce a 5/8 sphere of the hex-pent geodesic configuration. As with the ports and pores of all organic systems, the size and shape of these openings sort, sieve, and classify the inbound and outbound physical component traffic of metabolic regeneration which the Fly's Eye domes embody. The Fly's Eye dome's pores are all 7 feet diameter. Circular openings. These circular openings serve alternately as doors, vents, solar energy cell mounts, etc. The circular openings constitute 3/4 of the surface area of the domes, while the manufactured shell structure components constitute only 1/4 of the structure's surface. Since the circles have rigid rims, the closure of the circles can be accomplished by 2 spread apart drum heads of tensed thin film or fabric materials, ergo at low relative cost. The structural shell components constitute a comprehensive leak-proof water shedding system that, with the circular openings covered, leads all rain and melting snow into the shell's watercourse siphoning system.
The cylindrically rimmed.
Yeah, I'm just cisterning system. The cylindrically rimmed circular openings will be tensilely covered with opaque, translucent or transparent glass, plastic film, metal glazing or screening, or some combination thereof. They will serve energy harvesters in the operation of the dwelling by parabolically collecting incoming energy in sunlight foci, liquid heating cells, and circular opening mounted wind drag driven air turbines. The structural shell components constitute a comprehensive leak-proof water shedding system that Fly's Eye domes are of 2 sizes. The smaller 26-foot diameter one is constructed of only one type of mass-produced strong, lightweight, hyperbolic saddle form component. The larger 50-foot diameter one is comprised of only 2 types of mass-produced structural shell and watershed constituting components, which are also of the hyperbolic saddle type. Both 26 and 52 diameter domes can consist of 2 concentric identical domes with a space of 6 inches between and no metallic interconductors. This spacing produces highly efficient insulation as well as an excellent hot and cold air ducting system. The concentric dome's interconnection is accomplished with a 7-foot diameter outside circle and 6-foot deep conic tubes made fast at the 7-foot outside end of the circular openings of the spheres. The smaller fly's eye provides the optimally workable fundamentals for comfortable, efficient living in a 2-story shelter. It is small compared to conventional house, but huge next to a van, camper, or almost any of the thousands of yachts enthusiastically occupied while tied up at the marina slips. Optimum use of space will be important. The larger fly's eye is 50 feet in diameter, capable of enclosing 3 or more stories, each of 2,000 square foot floor area, a garden, trees, and a pool. While also equipped with all the living essentials at various levels, its space utilisation will be quite different from the smaller fly's eye. The 50-footer accommodates what we call the Garden of Eden living in a garden. The fly's eye domes are designed as components of a living reservice.
And that actually completes page 313. And there's more later, but we're approaching the 0 hour.
Yes.
So that'll probably be a good place to pause. And then we'll pick it up right here at the basic next time we start. It might be good next time to review these domes a little bit. I'll read ahead and see if he's leaving it behind or if we're going to always be referring back to these things. Sounds good. Any comments or questions on what we've just read?
Why haven't we adopted it?
It's what?
Why haven't we adopted it?
Yeah. I look at that fly's eye and I go, that's weird. Okay.
Part of it is it's part of it's part of living reservice, and we haven't been focused on that.
Yeah. In fact, we do have a couple of seconds. This last picture is kind of hard to see. There's a man standing, there's a human being standing there. And I think I can.
Yeah, so he says it could be a 3-story building.
Yeah.
So there's a guy standing there. And evidently it's below ground, interestingly, which serves as some kind of foundation, I presume. And interesting. I got more on that page, so I think what I'll do is just bring this thing down here like that and bring this down like this, and that'll be as big as possible for the next thing. Okay. Comments or questions? Time for takeaways. And how are you feeling? And what are you taking away tonight or today or this morning?
Yeah, I think I've taken quite a bit and I've shared. But what I just want to let I won't be able to make the 7th of April. I'll be away in Bali because we're doing groundbreaking for a school there. So so the timing and everything may not work on that weekend. So I'll wish everybody happy Easter in advance. Okay. And the other thing I want to announce, actually, I just got this. This is my book. This is the mock-up.
That's your book?
Yes.
It's hard. Hang on.
Can I buy it on Amazon?
It's not.
Do you have a
it's
link?
the mock-up. It's all done except the printing is going to be ready soon. So when it's done, I'll let you know.
Can
So
we
the
pre-order
title. Oh, I'll send it to you guys. Don't worry about ordering. I'll send it to you. Okay.
Thank you.
And it's the 5 foundations of education for the future. So what I wanted to say is because the last chapter because I've got the 5 major things that need to change, right? And the number five is actually starting with the end, so the problem with education is they start from the beginning where things are just the most boring, but you can't get kids excited from talking about how laser first started. And so all what you need to do is to show them laser is used to cut through like layers of steel, and at the same time you do laser eye surgery, because for a year I didn't dare to do the LASIK surgery because I can feel my eyes popping like a burst or something because of laser, right? Because we know what it can do. But my point is, you got to start the end. You got to get kids excited by the amazing things that you can do with whatever, right? Or the horror, or the tragedy, and then only you go back. So that's the premise of my the 5th fundamental change that needs to happen. So now, what I want to do is link to what we talked about today, which if we don't teach them like this, then it's very difficult for them to think. Like we talk about precession, yeah, to look at the end game, and people are looking at what is at the beginning and the outcome as being, caused by this main thing. But when you do the main thing, you got to look all the way out there and you work backwards, then only this will make sense, right? So, and that's what kids need to learn from that basis so that they can do that. Otherwise, when you do 2G, 3G, and 4G, you're thinking only of the moment and not what happens if the next thing comes along, and the next thing comes along, and what are you going to do with what is left here. And very often like our fax machines and all that, so what came along is that the fax machine then became something that we throw out into the landfill, and things like that. So until we change out the way the education is presented to the students, they will not think from that space. And so that's my point. I'll definitely send it to you, okay? But it's gonna come out soon, just maybe over the next month or so, okay? So yes, Joe, how do you feel, and what is your takeaway today?
I feel very good. I really had a great time with a lot of our, a lot of the conversation. And thank you actually, John, for reading. It's there was a lot even more that we could have gone into with what Bucky was talking about with decentralization, and even what he was saying about Brazil and Russia. And I think that kind of gets to the point that I was talking about a little bit earlier. It just, maybe that's localized on a national scale as opposed to a global scale. And that the solutions that that we come up with, or that Bucky is proposing or had spoken about, we ought not forget they have to be implemented at a local level. And I think from that perspective, it becomes a very dynamic type of problem, where we talked about a little bit how there is an impact on labor, how there are local laws that have an impact. There are local interests that have an impact. And so all of these things have to be considered in addition to the technology itself. So the housing, the type of housing that you're using, and whether or not it's providing you with the outcome, to get to your point, Ann, with the outcome that that's aligned with your values. So I think a lot of this is sometimes it's kind of what I'm taking away is it's a shift in values away from old paradigms and old ways of thinking. And kind of focusing on providing a service to people that is more based on a model that is less focused on scarcity, that is more focused on abundance. But at the same time, there's this there's an approach that basically where we have to, think about what where these things can be implemented and how quickly. And I think that that's a legitimate. I went to a lecture at Penn where they actually, University of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia, where they actually spoke about this. They had a lot of interesting information about what local communities, what their values were. And these are important things to consider whenever we're talking about any kind of technological change that Bucky's talking about, and maybe why some of it was successful and why some of it wasn't, why some of his predictions were accurate and why some weren't, maybe are still a work in progress. And understanding things, the gestation period, I think is actually going to be a really important thing when it comes to things like AI, which we had talked about a little bit today. So, yeah, no, I think that these, for me, my major takeaways are to really think about laws and labor and education within that framework. And that's something I've given a lot of consideration to lately. When I say all these things, I mean them on a local level. That's I appreciate everybody's contributions this evening. So, John, how do you feel, and what are you taking away from today?
Bucky, I think quite rightly, focused on the need for appropriate accommodation for every person. And I'm feeling frustrated that despite his foresight and his suggestions, which were outside of normal patterns of thinking, we seem to have made very, very little progress overall. There are so many people without a home, so many people without adequate housing. It's really the first need to have shelter. And he was showing 50 years ago ways in which it could be done efficiently with materials and design. And there's been some very limited embracing of that and evolution, things like the My Home project. But for the numbers involved and the needs of the planet, it really is distressing to think that big business and profit and government and bureaucracy have contributed so little to making adequate basic accommodation available to every person. And just, I mean, it's reflective of other areas, whether it's pollution, whether it's global warming, whatever it is, the same sort of thing. Bucky was outlining the issues so many years ago, and yet we seem to achieve overall. I mean, there have been many people who've made huge contributions, but so little as a planet to achieve what were basic human requirements. So I get frustrated sometimes and wonder what I can do and what we can do and where the block the basic provision of shelter and food for everybody, when there are millions and millions of people starving. This is what focusing on what we don't want, but I'm just, as I say, feeling frustration. So I'm glad I'm being reminded of it. I'm glad I'm being reminded of what Bucky did and wrote and said. He was spot on. So to say, I finished the day, glad I've been here, glad I've shared, glad I've been reminded, but frustrated. So a bit of a negative note, which I prefer not to do, but Richard, how do you feel? What do you take out of today?
Well, I guess actually I take away the kind of thing that you just expressed, and I say it in part because we read a little bit about the global electrical grid system in tonight's readings, and this is what Peter Meissen was all about. How many? 30 years ago. And that's what John and I, now that we realized that we were both at the 100th birthday celebration, and Peter was the sponsor, and I've seen him now on some other meetings more recently, and he's feeling the same way, that this electrical grid system that looked like such an obvious thing to evolve over a fairly short period of time has not happened. And I think, as you say, the universal kind of shelter and housing is kind of at the same level. It's there to be done. I've been connected with the homeless housing issues for quite a few years, and all the solutions that come out are still unsolved. And then I reflect on what Anne was just saying about the learning process, and with the book saying that start with at the end. And that to me sounds like a little bit like if Bucky figured out the function of humans to be that local gathering, problem solving, helping maintain the integrity of the eternally regenerative universe. It seems to me that that too would be where to start with kids, and then you can work your way back to understand, well, how did that really come out to be our function? And in the same way with Bucky saying that we should start with the whole and work to the parts, and then trying to understand how the parts fit into the whole, but they don't make up the entire whole. And as I think Anne just underlined it, that we start out learning about parts and we add them. And it's almost as if there's some grade 1 parts, and then grade 2, and then grade 3, and grade 12, and maybe university. And that at the end of that process, we're all expected to now know what the whole is.
Yeah.
And it just is not there. But if we reverse that, that's why one of the wireframe models that I've been working with was just that you have a kind of a holistic frame structure. And I worked with students on the basis that we can start out here in this very abstract and work our way down to the specifics of something that you're doing. Or if you want, we can start with the hands-on thing that we're doing. We'll work it back out to the abstract to make sure that we've covered all the angles, or as many as possible. And so you get that, you go from the whole to the part, or you can work from the part out to the whole. And if you could get, I just love what Anne was saying last week again, but how dumb it is to take a little kid, 5 and 6 years old, plunk them in front of a school desk and say, now be quiet for 3 or 4 hours and be compliant. And it takes away all the creativity, all of the bounce, all of the energy. So that's what I'm taking away. I'm just taking away all these frustrating sort of awarenesses of what could be that hasn't been yet. So over to you, Steve, and what are you taking away from tonight?
Well, I'm kind of Google-eyed about this fly eye thing.
Yeah.
It just boggles my mind that we're going to have a 50-foot diameter ball with eyeballs in it, and we're going to fly it over and drop it into the ground. And then it boggles my mind. That's way beyond me. It might work on Mars, but I don't know about Salt Lake City. But I'm taking away that we're breaking next week, March 31st, March 30th and 31st for Easter. We're going to come back on April 6th, and we'll be opening a new school. Congratulations, Anne, my gosh. And I can't wait for your new book. 2 congratulations are in order. And a couple of things you said. One thing you said, I'm writing this book on extreme mindfulness, and there's so many little details, and I constantly have to remind myself to go back and look at the end and say, okay, now why am I doing this little thing? Because if I just rattle off a list of minutiae, everybody's going to fall asleep and say, that's the most damn technical, stupid book I've ever read. So I got to start off with the big ideas in the front. So thanks for reminding me. I've been doing that a lot because I wrote a bunch of stuff that they're like recipes for cake. But unless you know what kind of cake you're making, you don't want to look at the recipe. So that's the idea. So I'm real grateful for that reminder. And I'm grateful for the font thing. I'll keep everything in the sans serif font. That'll make it easier to read. So I'm very excited about that. Okay, any other comments? Go ahead, Joe.
No, it's interesting in a discussion I had many years ago, but it still seems to be valid. And thinking about this idea of starting with the ends in mind. It's something where there's this distinction between AI and what humans do. We can start with the ends in mind, and that there's a discovery within that process that starts to emerge because you don't necessarily know the direction, but something like an AI is starting almost with the process. It's not starting with an ends in mind. And it's this idea that where the process is going to get you to where you're going to want to go very quickly, but it's not necessarily thinking in terms of, it's thinking about how to get there based on values that, we've already existed, as opposed to reimagining things. Even if you're going to call it generative AI, but it's interesting to think of things that way. And I think that's because one of the distinctions, but we're talking about, well, what's really the difference between, AI generating something and not, and how humans think about things. And but one of those was beginning with the ends in mind. And that there's, if you look at even what, there's a very well-known drawing of entrepreneurs where they have in the ends in mind, and they have their initial plan, and it's very linear. And then they have the idea of what the plan actually was, and it's drawn all over the place because that's what happens. Things don't necessarily happen in a linear process. So that when we think of things at a very, in a very, let's just say not holistic way, that it can be incredibly well, you're going to end up with a lot of the same results. I'll just say that. And problems, probably. You're just doing the same thing more efficiently, no more effectively. In a way, you're optimizing before you're looking at how to, or you're doing things more efficiently before you're figuring out how to optimize things.
Cool. And I just want to mention that Stephen R. Covey is a Utah dude, BYU, Utah professor. He wrote that book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and Begin with the End in Mind was habit number 2. So, I actually worked with the Covey Group for a while. I was considering being a consultant for them.
Mm.
and let me attend a weekend retreat up at Sundance Ski Resort. And I learned some amazing stuff from Stephen R. Covey. I worked with them on some other stuff, and they were a little bit not very aggressive. One thing I took away from that Stephen R. Covey retreat was how many of you, Stephen R. Covey said to everybody, how many of you feel better on a spring morning? It just rained, it's fresh, and the flowers are beautiful. How many of you feel better on those kind of morning? And 80% of the people raised their hand. He said, my goal is to help you take your weather with you, which I thought was cool. Okay. All right, you guys, I get a lot from this group. I might have some musical gigs coming up in the next few months, and which will put a stress on me being here. But we're very close to finishing this book, by the way. The appendix, we're on page 315. We're going to start at 313. We're going to start before, when we come back in 2 weeks, we're going to do the fly thing again to give everybody that 56-foot pod and the 50. But we're at page 313, and the book ends on page 3, or the appendices begin on page 314. And we covered around 10, 12 pages tonight. So we could be through this pretty well. And then we're going to have to call for a vote. Do we want to go through the appendices? Because they're basically chronologues of events and things that he has used as research in the book. So we'll have to decide if we want to do that. On the one hand, it'd be boring. It'd be like reading the recipe. But we've already had the end, and so maybe we want to read the recipe and just recall some interesting facts. I don't know. We need to consider that, and that's what's coming up. And also, I've been thinking that we ought to read. I haven't read it yet, but Richard, what do you think? You know this lady Edmondson who wrote a fuller explanation. Is that something that would be really cool? I'm going to look through that book as a possible next book, and that
Yeah,
might
could be.
Yeah. So I think what we really need, at least what I need, is I need to understand the 720 degrees and the concave and the convex. And I would like to challenge Manu a little bit. So, so if we can get to something there, that would be exciting for me. Okay, everybody. Thank you for your attention, your contributions, and for your spirit.
Stay
and
safe.
effort. Thank
All
you.
right.
And thank you, Steve, for everything you've been doing to keep us all, together like
Going.
this so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
More than my pleasure.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye, everybody. Hey, Richard.